Everybody, I'm Jack Bradshaw, President and CEO of the Northeast Chamber. Thanks for being here. Today's workplace is a confluence of 5 generations with values and ideals that are diverse and distinctly different. Effective managers today have to discard the conventional notions of authority, rules and red tape, and traditional styles of negotiating with employees. You know, back years ago, I think our average job time was about 20 years at each job. Now it's about 2.2 years. That makes today's workplace more demanding than ever, and really requires that you accept change and learn to thrive in a constantly changing environment. Today's breakout session panelist, Dr. Alan Gobin, is president of Tarrant County College Northeast Campus, and Dr. Terry Moshala, hopefully I got that right this time.
Well, you got very close again.
Is executive director of teaching and learning, and both navigate daily in this multi-generational environment and are here to help us all understand how to manage better and put more effective teams together by understanding today's multi-generational workplace. Please give them each a warm welcome.
So welcome everyone. We're so glad that you're here. And you know, as we look at the morning conversation, wasn't that great to hear some of the history here and look 20 years into the past, and then to begin to transition and look 20 years in the future. While we do this, it's important to understand and consider the interplay between different generational groups and how they communicate and make progress.
And communication really is core. I do a lot of these sessions, and so does Alan. We do some together. This is generational, but in my opinion, it's really communication, understanding who you're talking to and what that person values and how to make a connection. So.
And how to listen in the context of
listen.
generation and understand that you are in the context of your generation as you listen as well. So we talk about communication a lot, but that really leads to what the panel was talking about this morning, and that's effective collaboration. So collaboration takes a lot of time and energy, though. Why would you take the time and energy? Labor is in the middle of the word collaborate. It takes that extra time and energy to collaborate. But the challenge that we have right now is competition used to be defined by something near you. Now it's such a global playing field that it really takes a collaborative focus in order to be successful. So we want to look back a little bit at what drives people as they consider collaborating. And I better tell them now that I've had a little trouble with the clicker this morning. There's a little delay sometimes, so I apologize ahead of time. There are 4 different types of power at play that are driving people. And these commingle tremendously. So they all exist all at the same time, but at certain times or in certain places, you'll see one of these become really the focus. So the first is survival power. Survival power is a motivation of fear of not surviving. So there's a driving instinct to survive. And we have times when that has been really the focus. Then we have eras of production power. And you think of the Industrial Revolution in America, think of post-World War II America. There's a huge focus on production capacity coming right off of World War II and the production focus that existed then. Look at China right now. What's going on, there's a tremendous focus on production, but the motivation behind it is often still fear-based. There's a lot of fear driven into that culture of industrialized production. So it's fear of not keeping up, fear of not meeting the quota, fear of losing your job, and those kinds of things.
And was often used in places of employment as a motivator. I remember going into one, I won't say the name of the company, but they had red, green, and yellow for each group, and which team was doing well and which wasn't, which is a little intimidating.
Yeah. Things began to change, though, and we've had modern technologies, not the least of which is the internet, but there were other technologies before that really started to drive society and started to change this dynamic. Contribution power became very, very important. So it was not just doing a particular production within an 8-hour workday or something like that. It was what kind of creative contributions can you make that really move the needle, that go forward leaps and bounds. So if you think about contribution power, what's driving that? It changes the dynamics, because now it's the love of the creativity, the love of the new idea, the love of that leap forward. And so the motivations become more love-based, and our successful workplace becomes more mutually supportive. Collaboration then takes that to the next level. So if you think about, sorry, I have to work on the clicker here. Yeah, you might have to throw something at it.
Okay.
So collaboration power just ramps this up to a whole new level. There's a lot of give and take in collaboration, and a lot of mutual progress, mutual benefit, but it's based in love. And so I don't mean romantic love, but I mean caring and supporting and helping and nurturing. There's a different type of motivation that has to happen if real collaboration is going to happen. And so if you look at what prevents collaboration, it's usually ego and fear, or fear-based ego.
It's interesting to me what human beings will do when they are gripped with fear, or what they will do when their feelings of who they are threatened. It seems to take away from them all empathy and compassion, but it's also sort of animal-based, because it's what we do when we feel cornered or scared. So it's a mix.
Yeah, and we have to think about, how do you get beyond this? How do you move beyond the fear-based ego? So it prevents you from listening effectively. In childhood, we're taught how to read, how to write, how to speak, but we're told to listen. And there's a huge difference when you actually learn how to listen. I probably wasn't taught how to listen until I got a master's degree in counseling. That's when I really went through, here's how you listen effectively, and there's an actual methodology to that. But people tend to listen and speak in the context of their own generation.
Yeah, and many times those of us who are older, we haven't been taught how to listen, but we learned the hard way how to listen. Does that resonate with you when you have responded before someone was finished speaking, and you sort of embarrassed yourself because you didn't really answer the question? And so generationally, we learned that because of a self-defense mechanism, but possibly with collaboration, less of that.
If we're not doing this effectively, we're trapped in fear and things aren't progressing. It becomes a vicious cycle, and things don't happen well. There's a great little story about a father and his son are on a coastal area. They're walking down the beach, and the little boy says to his dad, "Daddy, why do the fishermen have those buckets for the crabs, but they don't have any lids on them?" And his dad explains to him that if there's only one crab in the bucket, it can get a hold of something, it will climb out. But if there are multiple crabs in the bucket, when one starts to climb out, the others will reach up, grab a hold of it, and pull it back down. And think about that analogy in our society. When people are locked down in fear and fear-based ego, they're like crabs in a bucket. They reach up and pull other people down because they don't want anybody else to outshine them.
Yeah, and they're thinking maybe if they grab this person, they'll get out too, but it just pulls you right back down.
I'm sorry. So how do you listen effectively? Tony Zeiss has a great quote. He says, listen to others as intently as you would listen to a toddler's first words. Strive to become a good communicator, and you'll be astonished at how easy it is to make a good impression, project confidence, and build trusting relationships. And then I always like to say, how else do you overcome fear and this ego issue? Maybe use a little bit of humor.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's no other way to get through some of the stresses, right? Isn't that right? You just better laugh at yourself at the end of the day, because otherwise you go home and drink, right?
Well, Matt, we just learned something about Terry.
I laugh all the time. I laugh all the time.
We want to take a quick look at the context of what's going on in the interplay of the generations, but let's look at their workplace. So look at an organization of whatever sort or size, and think of this not only as an organizational cycle, but perhaps as a community cycle also, because you could use this same model and just tweak it a little bit. We could do a semester-long class on organizational theory and look at this, but I'll condense it down to a couple of minutes. So Organizations start with a creation or a recreation point. And from that, they go through a phase of creation. And during that phase, it's wide open communication. The meetings tend to run long and the ideas get floated around and you're not quite sure if you accomplished something by the end of the meeting or not, but you had some good ideas and you probably set up another meeting, you're going to talk some more. When you move into the growth phase of a cycle, then the meeting becomes more focused. There's a tangible outcome, there's an action list, the agendas start getting a little bit tighter, and through both of these phases, though, communication channels are wide open. People are communicating pretty freely and openly with each other, regardless of the generation that they're in. You then segue into a performance phase of the cycle. Performance is different. So back here where you had wide open communication, you probably wore 4 or 5 hats doing all kinds of different things. In growth, you maybe start to focus a little bit more. You're wearing 2 hats. When you get into performance, people specialize more. This is when the silo effect starts to happen. So organizations become much more siloed. It's not that they intentionally did that. It's just a natural part of this life cycle that you don't need to communicate across the areas quite as much because the strategy's already decided, you're already working on things, and you're really trying to build your reputation and focus on performance. You then move into a transition phase. Some of these theories call this a decline or a change phase or something. I think those can have negative connotations. I just like to call it transition. It's just things are different, things are transitioning. So again, think of organizations, think of communities that are going through this. And what happens is the communication becomes much more siloed during performance. During transition, the communication breaks down. The old structure that used to be really reliable doesn't work anymore. Things get really messy. People are upset with each other because they think something was going on for this reason and find out later it wasn't even really that reason. And all kinds of turbulence starts to occur. And then at some point, your critical mass comes together and you have kind of a starburst recreation. And you go back into the creation phase and it becomes a little bit more fun.
Now, one of the interesting things that if you're truly collaborative and creative, as Dr. Goldman is talking about, during that high peak performance time, you're preparing for when that's no longer adequate, when that's no longer high peak. You know that something will come along, you know something will happen in society, so you are prepared for it rather than having that crash time when people turn on each other.
Yeah, and this cycle used to take many, many years oftentimes for organizations to go through. It's going so much more rapidly now for most organizations, and that's one of the big dynamics is that you have multiple generations interplaying with each other while this cycle is spinning much more rapidly. If you're in a large, complex organization, you probably have many, many versions of this cycle happening in different areas at the same time also, so it gets really complex. We have to really stop and think about how can we communicate effectively in order to make things happen cohesively and move forward. Because over time, all organizations, no matter how well intended, they start to look a little bit like this. That's get out of the way so you can take a fun look at that. That's off the internet. It's called Redneck Mansion. And this, in Tarrant County College, for example, I would say this is like the central administration. Each of these are campuses. They were built and added at different times. They're different colors, and and inside each one, they all are just kind of like we want it, whether it's a college or a business or corporation or whatever. We kind of get our own area, our own silo, and it's just like we want it. And then it's only when you step back and really look at the complexity of the whole thing that you see how mismatched it is or how it's not really working very effectively. So while all of this stuff's going on, and that cycle, think about that cycle happening rapidly. A friend of mine who's an entrepreneur, we were having lunch one day, and he owns technology businesses, 2 or 3 of them. And he says, we're talking about this, that, and the other, and he says, he said we redo our business model every 4 years. And I was eating lunch, and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, And he said, no, you didn't hear me. He said, we do our business model, we renew it every 4 years. We don't do a strategic plan every 4 years. We reinvent our business model every 4 years. That's our cycle. And I said, wow. And he was talking about how it's faster and faster. Now, that's a technology business, so maybe it's a little faster than others, but it's,
Well, but
intense.
it makes sense, actually, to me. It's not that drastic. Strategic planning for 10 years, how does that work out for you? Not too well.
Yeah, one of the things Rick Smyer will talk about over lunch probably is adaptive planning.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to hear the term adaptive planning as, not that you don't do strategic planning, but that your strategic plan has to have morphed and become adaptive in nature. So let's talk a little bit about generations. So let's tee this up by saying that generational identity is at least partly or maybe mostly self-defined. The researchers bracket certain birth years to define a generational group, but it's an inexact science. So we're looking at tendencies and things that often happen, but Terry and I, as we talk about the generations, we will say maybe the baby boomers do this or the millennials do that. We don't mean that they always do it, and we're not trying to stereotype them.
Right, because we're talking about human beings, right? And we're talking about human reactions and human behavior, so it's never carved in stone. The interesting thing to think about whenever we talk about this, is that this concept, this topic, is very much a Western concept, a Western culture's concept, because we have had more ways of women working. We've had technology that other parts of the world haven't. So when you start interacting with your fellow human beings, if you are working with individuals who come from an recent immigrant background, they may not have had the same experiences that affected them this way. So does that make sense? That's why it's not cookie cutter and everybody brings his or her own experiences. Yet, as Alan will know, it's kind of bizarre sometimes how similar people are in a generation.
I used to work with a director of counseling that had a sign in his office that said, "You are absolutely, wonderfully special and unique, just like everybody else."
Yeah.
And you know, so within a generation, you are unique, but there are some tendencies. So let's talk about those. Birth years bracketed are often argued upon by researchers about what really constitutes the generational group's birth years. The baby boomers are probably the most concretely identified as 1946 to 64, but preceding them, their next elders are often called traditionalists, born in the 1920s to 1945, and they have other names.
Veterans, silent generation.
Yeah, veterans or silent generation or traditionalists. This is the generation that is very knowledge-based in their communications. They tend to be very politically savvy. So on the upside, they're very reliable in communications and follow-through. You can really count on these folks typically. Here are some iconic photos of the generation and different ways to capture them, but I like this one up here. A penny saved is a penny earned. This is the generation that might have 4 or 5 Mr. Coffee makers that quit working, but they keep them in case they need a part. Or what was it you said they keep?
Keep the carafe, right? Keep the
yeah.
carafe, so you don't have to buy a whole new carafe.
In case you cracked a new one or something on the new model. that you
Save
get.
it, save it.
Yeah.
And remember, this is the generation, at least right now, that came from a social phenomenon of the Great Depression. So this was what these individuals grew up with. And so being thrifty was ingrained in their DNA as survival.
Absolutely. So we tie back a little bit to survival power then. This is
Yep.
a generation very
Same
attuned
thing.
to survival power.
Yep.
There we go.
You're
We
good.
got it.
No,
So no, this is good. There are challenges. In any generation, you're going to see strengths and challenges in communication. For the traditionalists, the biggest one that I often see is that, that's the way we've always done it. So it's tried and true, it works, a little resistance to changing. There's a wonderful story about a son and his mom are talking, and he asks her why. She's making dinner, and he asks her, why do you cut the end off the roast beef and then cut the other end off, and you put the big piece in the pot, and you put the other two, and then you put potatoes and carrots in there. Why do you do that? And she said, well, I don't know. That's how your grandma taught me how to cook when I was little. And later on, it's a holiday dinner. Grandma's over, and they get her in the kitchen. They say, Grandma, why do we do this? What's the big cooking secret? And his grandma says, well, when your mom was a little girl and I taught her how to cook, we only had a pan this big. We only had a pot this big. So we had to do that. So so that's the way we've always done it. It doesn't necessarily always work. So if you would, I'm going to have you close your eyes for a moment, and we're going to look in the adult years, the earlier adult years of the traditionalist generation. And radio's really big then, so you're driving down the road, you hear this on the probably AM radio. Each time we have a quarrel, it almost breaks my heart, 'cause I am so afraid that we will have to part. Each night I ask the stars up above, why must I be a teenager in love? All right, I won't abuse your ears with the whole song, but you get the idea? The era and the sort of innocence of the time compared to our modern, crazy, busy society.
So that's stuck in my head now. You did it earlier, so hang on, it's going to be in your head. Yeah.
So let's take a look at the baby boomers then. And sorry, I'm still fighting my clicker. So baby boomers born in 46 to 64. Terry, I'm an older Gen Xer, by the way. I'm on the cusp of the baby boom, but I was born in 68, so I'm an older Gen Xer. And Terry, I must say, she only looks like she's in her 20s, but she is indeed
Hard work, right?
a member of the baby boom, I think. But you have
Yes.
an interesting perspective on your own position.
Right. Depending on what time frame you look at, I'm sort of close to Xers. And for some reason, my temperament and my personality is is quite a lot closer to millennials. So that's just a temperament thing with me. I don't know why it is, but it's true. So I really do empathize with Generation X issues because not when I was younger, but when I was a little bit older, my mom went to work, and so I was a latchkey kid. So I'm kind of a blend of a whole lot of things in there. So.
Yeah. The baby boom generation, though, this is a generation that is very idealistic in nature. The authors Strauss and Howe talk about types of generations, and they call the boomers an idealist generation. So they talk about them in the context of having these broad ideals and coming together collectively and doing things collectively. This is a group that has now reached an age position in life where they're also, in terms of communication strengths, they're very interpersonally savvy and have a lot of political savvy and interpersonal polish.
Yeah, and remember too that for a while, and you notice I say for a while, you baby boomers out there, you feel this pain. We used to be the largest generation. We aren't any longer. So we really had things our way. We could get whatever we wanted with social change. The motto for me, personally, is really a veteran era motto, but it applies to baby boomers. I'm all into, Rosie the Riveter is my person, because baby boomers say, we can do this. You know, if we get enough people together, we can do it.
Yeah, on the downside, the Gen Xers call them the 800-pound gorilla, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's a big generation that Xers have to follow.
Because they'll always be bigger than you guys, sorry.
Sorry, it just is what it is.
Thing, yeah.
So some iconic images for this generation, they were parented and taught by the traditionalist generation. So a penny saved is a penny earned. And so depending on whether they rebelled against that or whether they embraced that philosophy, or maybe they embraced it a little bit later in life after rebelling and then it didn't work so well.
Right.
But they tend to be very portfolio focused. And I love the car images. I asked somebody in the baby boom, what should I do? They said, oh, put a muscle car in there. You gotta have a muscle car from the 60s or 70s or something like that. So
they embraced it after they accumulated a great deal of debt. And then they got up into saving.
Yeah. So let's look at the challenges then. Baby boomers exhibit often a lot of communication challenges. So this is a generation that tends to have lengthy text-based communications. If you go around and look at different organizations' websites, if you see one that has everything you could ever want but you can't find it and it's all a lot of written word, it's probably designed by baby boomers.
Yes, and baby boomers are, in my opinion, single-handedly responsible for defeating the concept that computers would save trees. Because those of you baby boomers, you know you don't just read everything. If there's something important on your computer, you print it, don't you? Yes, you always print it, and as I said at the last session, I always do. And you probably read it with a yellow highlighter in your hand. Yes, because there's nothing important in this world unless it's yellow or pink. So we are very text and hold it based.
Yeah, and as you transition to Gen X, you're going to see a lot more imagery-based communication. So it's media flashes, imagery, a lot quicker communications based on images. And the baby boomers often misunderstand that kind of interchange. I'll give you an example. If we're on a project team working together, there's about a half dozen of us, and if I turned to somebody and I said, okay, Wonder Twin powers activate, and held out my hand like this, we bump knuckles and activate our Wonder Twin powers. Do you know what that means? In the context of the Gen Xers in here, go, yeah, I know what that means. What it means is it's from a cartoon reference of superhero cartoons when we were kids, and the Wonder Twins would activate their powers, and then they would go tackle the bad guy, whoever that was. So what it means in the context of a meeting is, hey, we got what we need, let's activate, let's go get it done, right? And so those imagery reference communications can be really confusing. Baby boomers are like, slow down now, tell me what that is again. If you'll indulge me, go ahead, close your eyes again, because I don't like you looking at me when I do this. But I'll give you a song from the formative years of the baby boomers. So they're driving down the road, turn on the radio, and they hear, left a good job in the city, working for the man every night and day, and I never lost a minute of sleeping, worry about the way things might have been. Big wheels keep on turning, proud Mary keep on burning, rolling, rolling, rolling on the river.
Whoop,
See,
whoop, whoop, whoop. I can sing.
you wanted to sing along, didn't you, Terry?
Right.
Usually, if I have a big enough group on that song, the baby boomers all start singing along. It's hilarious.
Kelly did. Yeah.
Working for the man. Hear the hard-hitting lyrics? It's a whole different era. Think about the civil rights era, the 1960s, or going into the 70s, Vietnam's going on, protests all over the place. It is a really, really different time for communications, and so it comes out in the culture, in the music, and people hear that in their head. They hear, don't we all have a jukebox in our head? You have that? Sometimes you get the wrong song stuck. You have to switch to a different song to get it off that one. But we have those cultural formative experiences stick with us. And the funny thing for me about the baby boomers, working for the man, they really had this image of the man. We're going to fight against the man.
Stick it to the man.
Stick it to the man.
Stick it to the
right?
man.
And you know what the funny part is? I had a retired baby boomer colleague, a president at a college, Pamela Fisher, and Dr. Fisher retired. She was an older end of the baby boom generation, and she said this. We were talking about all this stuff. She said, you know, as a boomer, she said, we set out to overturn the establishment, but we have become the establishment.
Yeah.
And she said, I don't think most of us realize that, or we wouldn't like it very well. I said,
Very
wow,
true.
that is so insightful. Well, how about Gen Xers then?
And that's you.
I'm an older Xer. So Xers, societal structures broke down during the birth years and formative years of Xers. So the divorce rate in the United States of America tripled during the birth years of Gen Xers. About mid-1960s until 1979. During that time frame, we had a United States president resign in disgrace on television. We had the Vietnam War. We had downsizing in the early adult years of the 1980s was the farm crisis and recession. And so what you find as a result of all these things, and the divorce rate tripling was so key because it created this latchkey kid.
It did, and that was, people don't really realize what a huge phenomenon that was when mom went to work and then there were divorces. Never before had children gone home like that.
Yeah, and divorce and mom going to work at the same
Absolutely.
time. So
Yeah.
I had two rules when I was a kid: was be home by dark and don't get killed. Those were the two
Yeah.
rules. You know, each generation kind of gives the next one what they wanted. So the traditionalists gave the baby boomers this penny saved, a penny earned, you know, this coaching about security, right? But what did the baby boomers want? Freedom.
Freedom.
Freedom, baby.
Freedom.
Right? So what did they give the Xers? They gave them a lot of freedom, tons of freedom. When I was 9 years old, my folks had divorced when I was 4 and a half. I was 9 years old. We lived with my mother. And my job after I got off the school bus was to watch my 6-year-old sister until she got home, which was sometimes 9, 10 o'clock at night or later because she sold real estate. She sold farm ground. And so I thought that was all special and unique, but it's special and unique just like everybody else, right? It really isn't among Gen Xers. Gen Xers have tons of stories like that where that's just how they grew up. So they tend to be very self-reliant. And one of the things you'll find with Xers, very pragmatic, hidden agendas, they don't like politics much. Let's just get it done. They're used to cutting through a lot of clutter and just getting what matters and then getting it done. And so that's a great strength of Gen Xers.
Absolutely. And Dr. Gobin is much more collaborative, but he still likes, as he will always point out, small groups working on projects, not committees of 50.
Figure out the big problem, get small groups working on it,
yeah.
and then they go get something done.
Right.
Gen Xers hate committees. We like task teams. Task teams have an outcome, they get done, there's closure, they disband, and then you put another one together. Committees, I don't know why they name them that, maybe because they commit to meeting again and again.
I don't know, they should be the same thing. They should be, but they're not, so.
Yeah. So a few of the iconic images of Gen X, oops, I'm sorry, jumping around here. Whereas baby boomers and traditionalists remember the moment of the JFK assassination, that's like the frozen in time moment. Xers weren't around for that, but what they do remember is the Space Shuttle Challenger, 1986. That's a defining time is frozen moment for Gen Xers. And a time where, the Gen Xers have, they're kind of crushed. There was such high hopes about the Challenger, and then boom.
And it was just another example of, well, I won't go into the song you're singing, but.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second. So the organizational structure, look to the bottom right here. A typical hierarchical structure in an organization, it looks like a pyramid. It has a point at the top, whoever's in charge, and then it kind of filters down in a military-like bureaucracy or hierarchy. Xers don't view organizations that way. They might be in organizations that are like that, but they don't view them that way. They view it as flipped upside down. So they don't think you rise to a level of power and influence. An Xer would be more inclined to think you sink to a level where you support more weight. That's how they're going to view that organizational dynamic. So, but they're not all rosy and sweet. They do have some communication challenges, Terry.
Well, as we all do, if you think about it, because one of the things that Gen Xers do that we all do is they don't quite get a grasp of why the older generation is the way it is and how to engage them on board. But all generations do. So they can be abrupt. But what I tell people in these sessions, please don't judge people on what they grew up with. This is who they are. They're not trying to be rude or black polished.
Yeah, but to the point, it's not really good or bad or right or wrong.
No.
It's just different. And so whereas baby boomers, if they're really unhappy about something, they tend to get together and try to tackle it as an armada. And Xer will just shut down and not say anything.
Right.
They'll just disengage and back up from it.
Your really quiet, withdrawn employee is not necessarily a negative thing. He or she is dealing with something around him.
And quite frankly, if it's an Xer, probably getting a lot done.
Yeah, exactly. So just don't worry.
Just not necessarily in that engaged way. So again, if you'll indulge me, you close your eyes and I'll take you down the road, and we're in the high school years of Gen Xers or the early adult years, maybe late childhood years. They turn on the radio and they hear, "We both lie silently still in the dead of the night. Although we both lie close together, we feel miles apart inside. Was it something I said, something I did? Did my words not come out right? Oh, I tried not to hurt you, oh, I tried. But I guess that's why they say every rose has its thorn, just like every night has its dawn. Just like every cowboy sings a sad, sad song. Every rose has its thorn." You can
Now
open
I'm
your eyes now.
depressed. Now I'm depressed.
Now you're depressed. They didn't say every cloud has a silver lining and it'll all be wonderful. They said every rose has a thorn. Watch out for it. The Xers saw so many societal things crumble that they thought they could rely upon as children and as adolescents and early adults, that they really don't trust all those structures. They don't know if it's going to be around tomorrow or not. The research that I did a Generation X leadership topic for my dissertation, and one of the great quotes I had was, they said, why do Xers hop from job to job to job? And one of the researchers said, they're like the Lone Ranger. They do a good deed, leave a silver bullet, and move on. And that they don't have that same concept because they don't know if that job or that organization is still going to be there 5 years or 10 years or 20 years down the road.
And shorter attention spans, wanting something new. I've got that, so I understand.
Yeah, let's talk about the millennials a little bit. Born in about 1980 to 2000. And Terry tells me now that this is maybe the biggest group.
Yes, yes. Baby, you guys can't get bigger because you're already here. Baby boomers, we are leaving, not just jobs, but leaving life is a delicate way of saying it. So millennials are now the biggest generation. And just as I think I mentioned earlier, when the biggest generation you get, when you are the biggest generation, you get things your way. That's what's coming up with millennials. And I was talking with a gentleman after our last session who said, what does the future hold? And I said, well, focus on what millennials value, because whether you like that or not, they're the most voices in the room. And that's where we will go.
Yeah, Xers love that because we're sandwiched between the two. So we get to play second fiddle in both directions, right?
I always feel, sad for that generation.
The millennials do have some strengths. They're very technologically savvy. This is the generation that's native to technology. So as an Xer, we had 3 television stations, not 150 or 700.
Right.
We didn't have cell phones until we were in our 30s for most of us older Xers. It's a very different dynamic with the millennials who are true natives to technology. So it's totally changed how they act and interact.
And not how they learn, but how they think about things. And they are much less linear, which really troubles some of us who are all into step-by-step processes. So it's a kind of a rewiring when you're on a computer a lot. Think about when you're on yours and how you skate around in there.
So to give you a snapshot of how technologically different the millennials are than Xers, let's use an older example, a microwave oven. Do you think a microwave is really advanced technology to a millennial? Not at all, right? It's just an appliance. It's no more advanced than a washing machine or something like that. That was once upon a time a big advancement. Here's what happened to me as an older Xer. Grew up poverty level, a rural area in southern Iowa, and we didn't have any money at all, but my dad somehow scrapped together enough money to buy an automatic dishwasher, and so we had that in this old farmhouse, and we had it for a long time. But my aunt, my stepmom's sister, was single, no kids, had a good job, so she always got us some presents for birthdays or Christmas or whatever. She got the family a microwave oven in the 1980s. She got it for us, the whole family. And I will, to my dying day, I'll never forget my dad bringing that thing in and setting it on that dishwasher. The top looked like a kind of a board, and this thing's huge. And it's heavy, obviously, because he's coming in, walking like this. And he sets it up there, and he grabs the power cord, and he goes to plug it in over behind the counter. And he looks at all of us over his shoulder, and he says this. He says, now stand back, this thing might nuke you.
Which was a big worry, I remember that. Don't get too close, don't watch your food cook.
Yeah, for millennials, though, it's like, it's a microwave, that's how you cook, right?
Right.
So, I want to give you an iconic image of something that maybe stick in your head about the millennials. And I have to explain this one because there's a lot going on here, as there is in the millennials' experience of life. This is my friend John O'Brien, is the president of EDUCAUSE organization. And this is his son, Nathan. Nathan was a University of Minnesota class of 2011 student. And this was like his freshman year of college or something. And John went up there to see what he was doing, and he was supposed to be studying for some big final test or something like that. And he said, what are you doing? And Nathan said, I'm studying. And John said, wait a minute, I'll be right back. He went and got a camera, or probably at that time maybe a cell phone in 2011. But he went and grabbed his phone and he took a picture. And he explained it this way. He said, so there's a textbook here with a Sharpie. There are notes here, handwritten notes. There's a laptop computer. You can barely see it, but there's a laptop there. And John said there were about 7 or 8 windows open on the laptop while this was all going on. There's a guitar magazine here, and he has his guitar on his lap, and he had a cell phone laying over here somewhere. And he says to Nathan, "Look, dude, I thought you were supposed to be studying." And Nathan said, "I am." And John pointed out all this stuff, and he says, "Dad, it's not my fault. You can only do one thing at a time."
Yeah.
Isn't that priceless? That's so different. And to what Terry said, the linear nature of how things have been done in the past, yeah, linear doesn't exist anymore.
Right, and what he has in front of him is not considered technology to him. That's a computer. But what he carries in his pocket, or what you guys have on the table in front of you, is the cell phone, and that is the technology. You will notice, however, an interesting etiquette with millennials and with cell phones. When I grew up, and maybe a lot of y'all, you never went to someone's house unannounced to visit, right? You always called ahead, because that's just the height of rudeness. So you'll notice now that there is etiquette, which is, and I've learned it with my daughter, don't call me, text me and tell me you're going to call me, so that I can set aside time to talk to you. You notice that? They never answer your call, right? It's because you're being rude and knocking on their door without telling them.
Wow, what an insight. The millennials also, and if you read any of the literature on this, you might hear them referred to as Generation Y. So, thought you might like that depiction. The millennials, if they like a generational identity name at all, they prefer millennial. They don't like Gen Y because it subordinates them to X. It makes them the next letter in the alphabet.
Right.
But now we're beyond X and Y. We're getting to Z. Well, I forgot. Millennials, let's talk just a little bit about the challenges, because they do have some communication challenges.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know whose challenge it is. Millennials would say it's not my challenge. We, older generations, tend to want to communicate through at least email and all of that sort of thing, and we want some sort of grammar, and millennials are text-based for the most part, and oftentimes communicate at length texting. Back in my youth, my parents would get mad because I'd be on the phone all evening with the boyfriend, right? So, but now with millennials and Zs, you're texting all evening with whoever you're dating. So it's communication with the world, but the people around you aren't there. Although they are, you're focused, and that bothers a lot of older generations.
Yeah, as Xers cave into these kinds of devices, the millennials were very native to them. You know, we remember these big cell phones, Marty, and that panel we're talking about. Xers, that's their first experience with the mobile phone. But even though they weren't these smartphones, the millennials came of age with the flip phones and things like that, and they're very common to them. Mm-hmm. But you see Xers, and I see baby boomers actually put these things away during a meeting and expect you to do the same thing, which is really hilarious because I never do it. But the Xers and then the millennials do this also a little bit. Here's their etiquette and respectful use of this during a meeting is they do the ground squirrel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm here.
Like
I'm
that.
listening. I'm here.
And the Z, Generation Z, as we talk about Z, they just stay down here and they go, mm-hmm.
And my friend Brian's here in the audience saved me because he made the font, to show you my age, he made the font so big on my cell phone now, I can actually look at it. So have him tell you how to do that, those of you who are my age. It's wonderful. He saved me.
Well, one of the challenges we do find with millennials is they're so technologically savvy and engaged from having been those technical natives that they sometimes get really impatient with people who aren't and don't get it and don't know which button to push and those kinds of things. And they can be very impatient and distracted by that technology. How about Gen Z? Let's talk about them a little bit, Terry.
They're now older, but they're the little guys that if you left your phone near them, they would change. They'd get a hold of your phone and change the background or put in a song and they're like 3. They're the ones who you see, it used to be when you go to a restaurant and you see a small child in a high chair, he or she would be playing with food, right? And if you notice now there's a iPad there, so they're watching videos. So that's that generation that has never, ever, I always throw this in, used a paper map. Now think about that.
Never used a paper map.
Never
I used to
used a
teach
paper
geography, so I forced my Gen Z children to learn how to read a map.
But to what end?
Yeah.
Well, it's like, what, Dad taught me this, I never used it.
I always tell them if an asteroid hits a satellite, then you're going to have to know how to read a map to get somewhere.
Got bigger problems than that.
Dad, that'll never happen. This generation, though, has come of age with smartphones, and so they are really adept at sifting through terabytes of information and finding the thing that is meaningful to them. They'll get to it very, very quickly. We often hear complaints, we heard this about millennials, we heard about Gen Z, is that they're not ready for college and all this. And millennials and Gen Z, they're the best educated generation that's ever come to the college. Here's the difference. They don't learn a small number of things really, really deeply. They learn a whole lot of things kind of more shallow. But their knowledge base is huge. It is absolutely tremendous.
Trivia champs, probably.
Trivia champs. A couple of the icons for Gen Z. So think about apps. If you want to cater to this audience or figure out how to communicate them, just consider the whole app revolution and how apps work and how they're structured around that individual need to get something done, and they're easily available and they're pretty cheap too.
Yeah, that phrase, somebody needs to design an app for this. You hear that all the time.
Yeah. The other thing is, think about the television. The voice is really big right now. You know, there's a whole audience participation. Remember when I was a kid as a Gen Xer, it was the Gong Show.
Oh, yeah.
The judges were there and they did this. Well, what happened with American Idol and then The Voice now? Everybody votes, right? Everybody's involved in the decision.
And we use Poll Anywhere and Poll Everywhere in class, so you can get your students, if you choose, to respond to the polls, yeah.
Yeah, very different dynamic. So Gen Z is still forming. They're kind of hard to figure out because they're still at that age position where they haven't really fully formed all of their norms and the things that they would be characterized by, but they have some, and they do have some communication challenges. We mentioned a couple of them, just very distracted by these smartphones and devices.
Right.
They can really be completely distracted by them.
And it's, if you teach or if you're trying to get the attention in a business place, you find yourself having to be constantly moving and shifting because it's easy distractions.
Yeah, we have, in the collegiate environment, we have faculty members, and some of the faculty are just adamant about no smartphones in class, you turn them off, you do this, and I was like,
Yeah.
why are you fighting it? You got to figure out a way to use the phones in your curriculum and instruction because your delivery method and your engagement has to change because they're not going to give up that phone. So.
And they're using them even if you have a policy.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't have a song for you. I won't abuse your ears on that one, but I asked my daughters who are Gen Z, what song should I do? And they said, T-Swift. And I said, what? And they said, T-Swift. And I said, oh, Taylor Swift. Oh, okay. They said any T-Swift song will work for Gen Z. So I love the cars analogy because it's like we're going down the road of life. And as you look at the different generational groups, think about the fact that you are following your next elders. So you know your own generation, right? It's like inside your own car. You feel comfortable, you have the seat adjusted just like you like it, the mirrors are all adjusted, you know where all the buttons are, and everything's real comfortable to you. But you also know your next elder generation because you view them out the windshield. You've watched them all your life as your parents, your teachers, your older friends, your older co-workers, and so you've engaged a lot with them and you've really analyzed them and had a constant flow of what they're like, so they've influenced you. But just like driving down the road, how often do you look in the rearview mirror? And that's part of the trick, is being able to look in the rearview mirror. Now, if you stare in the rearview mirror, what happens? You're going to crash, right? So you have to park the car by the side of the road, get out, and go back and get into the car of the generation behind you.
And keep in mind that as much as we talk about helicopter parents who seem to know their children so much better than our parents did, yeah, we focus a lot of attention on our children and energy, but our whole life has been modeling our parents, either rejecting it or embracing it. So that's who we really see. We have to work hard to see someone other than our own kid. You see what I'm saying? my kid's a perfect millennial, right? But it's these others who are driving me crazy. So you got to step back and see that it's a whole generational thing.
It's one of the biggest complaints I've heard from Gen Xers about baby boomers, is that they just keep expecting Xers
Yeah.
to mature into baby boomers and do things like that. And the Gen Xers usually will tell you, yeah, we're just not like that. We're not going to, it's not a matter of maturity, it's a matter of I just do things differently.
And you can't change people, come on.
You have to really have a lot of empathy and get in their
Absolutely.
experience and listen.
Mhm.
So the other thing that I've noticed in my research and in my life experience is that there are things that happened at a societal level that were so sweeping during our lifetimes, ours just generally collectively, right? That makes a huge difference between baby boomers and older generations and Gen Xers and younger generations. And the thing that happened right in between has a lot to do with how they handle change. So for baby boomers, oftentimes change is something they like to see coming at them. They like to hold it out here, and they like to grab a hold of it before it hits them. You know, I don't want it to take me over. They want to analyze it. They probably want to create a strategic plan of how to handle it, and then they want to implement it. But it's all kind of held out here at arm's length. And for Gen Xers and the younger generations, change is just like oxygen. It's just...
Well, and the reality is that it's inevitable. When we look at the organizational cycle, when an organization is at its peak, there is a change coming. And
Yeah.
either you fight it, and it's usually unsuccessful, or you say, it's coming, so I'm ready.
Yeah, and my friend who said, an entrepreneur said that he has to change his business model every 4 years. So, and I was having lunch and said, oh yeah, okay, every 4 years. And he says, no, we don't do a new strategic plan every 4 years, Alan. We change our business model every 4 years. That's our cycle right now. He was talking about how fast that cycle's taking place now, where it used to be years and months and lots of planning time for things, and now it has to be more adaptive planning. You're going to hear Rick Smyer for our luncheon keynote, and he talks a lot about adaptive planning and the fact that you can have strategic plans, but you really have to couch them in the fact that they're going to adapt and change over the life even of that strategic plan, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, or whatever.
You're foolish to try to say this is how it's going to be.
Yeah. The other thing that we see is in relation to diversity. There's a very different view of diversity. We find baby boomers and older generations also tend to have that at arm's length. And in our organizations, it tends to be a program or a department, or it's something that we do. We're gonna handle diversity, or we're gonna address it. We're going to support it. We're going to do this or that. For Xers and millennials and Gen Z, diversity, again, is just like oxygen. It's just like, yeah, it's diverse. What else would it be?
And it's interesting, too, because if you really start thinking about that, then you realize at some point, those kinds of like institutional offices will go away, because it's just what you are in life. Everybody's different in the room. It's just what you are. So I have an office to teach people that everybody's different. But not yet.
Sorry, I got a little delay going here.
That was the last time, and you whacked it, and it did it. Yes. I said.
Well, so how are you going to do this effectively? All this stuff's going on. You have all these different power dynamics. You have ego, you have fear, you have love. You have all these things going on. You have this rapidly spinning organizational life cycle, community life cycle. It's a lot. You have the media blitz. You have all the modern technologies. And then you have generational position dynamics, where people have very different views of things. So how do you do this? Well, Les Brown says it's better to aim high and miss than to aim low and hit. Just thrown on that one. Those guys were obviously aiming low that day. So how do you aim high, and how do you create change? Ron Roth is a favorite author of mine. Ron Roth talks about love and fear, and he says that all emotions that are out there boil down to those two base emotions, love and fear. So anger, hatred, prejudice, jealousy, those are all fear in disguise. Those are fear-driven emotions, and they will cause people to do things, say things, and act in certain ways. But on the other side of the coin, you have love-based emotions. And I'm not speaking of romantic love so much as caring, helping, supporting, nurturing, those kinds of emotions. So if we really anchor ourselves in love, and how do you collaborate effectively, how do you communicate effectively across these generations, we cannot take hardline positions and paint ourselves as the expert or the way to be. We have to really engage and open up unselfishly from a basis of love and listen and acknowledge people. Favorite quote, we'll wrap up here and then we'll take a couple Q&A if we have time. Alice McLaren's The Ghost Dance. This is a children's book, but I love this quote. It says, "If all hold to the dream, the magic will be strong. Be strong to call back what we love the most, and of the new, keep what is good. Weave old and new in harmony." If our generations can base themselves in love and communicate and listen effectively, they can successfully weave old and new in harmony.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
On behalf of Dr. Terry Michela and myself, we thank you for being here. We really appreciate your time, and we'd be happy to answer a question or two. We have just enough time.
Yeah, but there's one already.
Would you be able to let us have a PowerPoint for this if we give you our email?
Yeah, we'll actually make all of the materials from the conference, as long as the speakers are okay with it, we'll make it all available. So we'll make this to all of the conference
And the
participants.
songs too?
The songs, you can go to iTunes and talk to the millennial about how to download the iTunes.
We recorded it already.
All right.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
up
no.
there, yeah, it's being recorded. So.
In the slide about the Gen Xers, it was saying they pretty much don't want to listen to the older generation or their experience. And then as you went to the millennials, it said they did tend to want to learn from others as well as adapt or implement their own thoughts. If you don't repeat or study history, you're doomed to repeat it. Well, where you would have there is, even as a boomer, a young boomer, I didn't always believe my parents or my elders. I did listen to them, but I really started to understand they halfway pretty much always knew what they were talking about. If you have that gap there where one full generation says, we don't want to hear what you have to say, you're outdated, and then the next generation says, we want to hear what you've got to say, there's a skip there. It's a reset so much. So, and have any of that come into play in your thinking?
Yeah, so the Gen Xers will very much listen, but they don't do it in the traditional fashion. And so that's a big distinction. So what the Gen Xers tend to do, because a little story I told you about, Gen Xer growing up experience, they tend to be so self-reliant and they've had to find the answer but they don't like looking to authority or something like that. They tend to find a mentor. So Xers will often connect individually with a mentor rather than like reading the best practice of something. They find mentors and they find knowledge experts in certain areas. There's a whole other, and we can do a semester-long class on it, but there's a whole other thing about a positivist versus a constructivist versus a postmodernist philosophical undermining. And what that means in common language is the positivist would be the baby boomer and older generations, and that is that there is an objective truth. There's a right, there's a wrong, there's a good, there's a bad, there's a black, there's a white. There are defined objective truths that we could honor or observe. Xers tend to be constructivists or interpretivists. So the Xers say, I'm going to construct my reality out of all these different things that I've experienced, and they tend to lean less toward an objective truth. It's more like, well, your truth is good for you, and mine is good for me. The millennials and younger, we've had a huge philosophical transition, boom, 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 from the schools of philosophy, and the millennials and younger tend to be what's called a postmodernist. The postmodernist is more inclined toward, well, there really is no truth, it's just all opinion. And so it's a much more fluid kind of open thing. But that's the big difference in transitioning to the Xers and then to the millennials.
Well, and honestly, there could be just a real logical reason for it. A lot of Xers have had family relationships that were often splintered. And so, whereas maybe you lived and your parents were married always and you had those big Sunday night dinners and you shared thoughts, Gen Xers didn't necessarily have that uniform approach. They would have stepmoms and stepdads and half-brothers and sisters and step-brothers and sisters. So it's a little, it makes sense that they would construct it because they've got it from so many different sources.
Yeah, wait, this
Instead
might
of
be
just
a,
dad.
this, I didn't know you were gonna say that, but it's a fun one to end on. So I'll tell you my own little personal story. Because my folks were divorced when I was 4 and a half, my dad remarried, I was stepmom, and then they had a kid together. So we have 8 kids in the family altogether. I have a stepsister, 2 stepbrothers, 2 half-brothers, a sister, and a half-sister. And I was the oldest of my dad's 3 biological children, the youngest of the 5 boys out of the 8, and 6th out of 8 in the overall birth order. So I was an oldest child, middle child, and youngest child in the family all at once, every time something happened. So you talk about positional identity and looking at, kind of creating the reality in the moment. What's different as an oldest child experience over here versus a baby in the family experience over here versus a middle child experience. That's not like my special thing. That's just really common. Those kinds of things are very common among extras.
Well, and even in my world, my dad was sort of ahead of his time with remarriages. So, but all the while, he was an overachiever, yes. So I've got almost the same mix as Alan, except that I've always been the oldest. So I was always, I was connected the earliest and the longest. So
Yeah.
that's what I patterned after.
Yeah. Well, we've covered a lot on generational groups. For the sake of time, we want to make sure you get to the lunch.
Your lunch.
And enjoy the time with lunch and with Rick Smyer's a wonderful speaker. We really appreciate you all being here so much, and thanks for coming to our session. We will stick around for a couple minutes if you have any follow-up questions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.